June 2023. The last Lexus LFA is sold. With ever-tightening noise regulations, this car will be remembered by many for the finest exhaust note of all time. Its sound has achieved legendary status.
My favourite car is a Lexus LFA. It was an amazing car. Why? Do you ever hear one?
A legend fueled by the myth that its exhaust was tuned by a music company.
The sound that you hear and the exhaust, which was tuned in partnership with Yamaha.
In case you guys don't know, Yamaha also makes acoustic instruments.
Yamaha
With Yamaha.
in their instrument division.
It was created by Yamaha. So we asked their music division. They actually came in and helped us tune the intake and exhaust.
June 2024. The former chief engineer of the Lexus LFA releases his memoirs and sets the record straight.
There's a kind of urban legend that the LFA's sound was created by Yamaha, the musical instrument manufacturer that's wholly separated from Yamaha Motor. Of course, one could be forgiven for thinking that.
But if the piano maker Yamaha didn't tune the LFA exhaust, who did? To find the company that was really responsible for the LFA's exhaust sound, I went into deep research mode, a search so deep that seemingly no one had managed to do that in over a decade. To find out the truth, I went places the internet has never even looked before. It's 5 lines down here. 3 companies were involved: TMC, the Toyota Motor Company, with 2 partners. One of them was of course Yamaha Motor, the engine manufacturer, but the third one is a company you've probably never even heard of, an exhaust system manufacturer that goes by the name of Sango. Sango has been Toyota's go-to exhaust supplier for almost 100 years, but Sango does not only supply exhaust systems, they also develop them. On their website it's quite easy to find a picture of the familiar looking 3-tailpipe muffler. And further down on this page you find an important puzzle piece in the development of the LFA's exhaust sound: the formant map. When I first found this, I had no idea what a formant is, but as long as you're not a vocal coach, you might not know it too. So I let her explain it.
Formants are the resonance frequencies of the vocal tract.
Turns out the LFA exhaust was not tuned like a music instrument after all, it was tuned like the human voice. At the time, Sango was conducting research based on analysis of human language pronunciation. But before we go there, we need to have a look at the LFA's vocal flaps, its V10 engine. To this day, the 10-cylinder out of the LFA remains the only V10 that found its way into a production car with a bang angle of 72 degrees, which results in perfectly even firing. And that is kind of important. A V10 basically consists out of 2 inline-5 engines that are joined at the hip. Each inline-5 on its own is perfectly even firing every 1/5 of an engine cycle. Pitch, 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 pitch. And because a 4-stroke engine cycle takes 2 full turns of the crankshaft, the gap between 2 cylinders firing correlates to exactly 144 degrees of crankshaft rotation.
144.
To get an even firing V10, you need to squeeze those extra 5 ignition events exactly in the middle of that 144 degree gap. And the 72 degree bang angle makes that possible. But most V10s are not like that. These naturally perfectly even firing V10s can have a couple of drawbacks, but that depends on the situation. For one, a shallower bang angle makes for a taller engine, and that alone can make it harder to package into the car, but of course it also depends on the shape of the car. But it's also much easier to machine 90-degree angles than some odd 72 degrees. So 90-degree V10s can be built cheaper, especially when they share the same design of a V8 that might already be in the pipeline. And even Formula 1 engineers in the past favored V10s with 90-degree bang angle, but not for cost savings. It gave them a lower center of gravity, made for a stiffer engine, and it saved some weight. All these things Formula 1 engineers like. 18 degrees difference might seem like a minor detail, but this changes how an engine will sound in a fundamental way.
Pitch.
Let's assume all exhaust pulses of an even fiving V10 get released into a pair of equal length headers. And after a short distance, these two headers merge into two individual equal length pipes. These two pipes are the path for the pulses to travel all the way to the back of the car, where they also merge into one single tailpipe. After these pressure pulses covered exactly the same distance, they will leave the tailpipe and continue to vibrate through the air. In theory, if we would draw a chart of these pressure fluctuations coming out of the tailpipe, it should look something like this.
Pitch.
With 5 identical recurring pulses per crankshaft rotation, they are of the 5th order. And this will be the first harmonic of the exhaust sound of this motor. So when this even fiving V10 spins at 6000 RPM or 100 times per second, it spits out 5 times as many pulses. 500 identical recurring pressure pulses per second, or 500 Hz. But this chart also shows multiple lines based on the 10th order, 15th order and 20th order. These are all multiples of the first harmonic. Why is that? Let me show you something. Even though this is the sound of a crossplane V8, this was still the best example I could find to show what can happen if the exhaust is designed in the right way. The first tower is the fundamental frequency. Usually, that's the most dominant and the loudest. In the case of this 8-into-1 headered V8, which is even fiving every 90 degrees, it's based on the 4th order. So at 3427 RPM, it's 228 Hz, apparently. Let's see what happens to these harmonics as we move through the RPM range. Not only do these frequencies change depending on the speed of the engine, but they also change in intensity. So in this very special sounding V8, the second harmonic actually can become louder than the fundamental. And a couple of frames forward, even the third harmonic becomes the most dominant. Could this be the key to create the impression of a higher pitch? It's almost like these are resonance frequencies of the vocal the exhaust. But the fundamental buildup of these harmonics will be completely changed when the order is changed in how these pressure waves get released into the atmosphere. Either by making them 12 paths that are a very different length, or by joining cylinders that are completely out of sync, or by not joining them at all. Or when the pressure waves are not evenly released from the engine, like it is the case in an uneven fiving 90-degree V10. The subtle difference in the firing order has a huge impact on the tone of the motor, making it sound a little bit less refined than the even firing V10. Let's assume this motor has the same equal length exhaust fitted as before, where all cylinders merge into a single tailpipe. If we would draw a chart of the pressure fluctuations coming out of it, in theory it should look something like this. Now this pattern only repeats 2.5 times per crankshaft rotation, therefore all harmonics that build up will be multiples of the 2.5th order. Taking a look at this chart again, it shows that at 6000 RPM the first harmonic is at only 250 Hz. And the distance between the harmonics also decreased, so the second harmonic at 6000 RPM is already at 500 Hz. What really stands out in this example is that now the 6th harmonic at close to 2000 Hz can become the loudest. But does it really sound that high pitched? Does it sound higher pitched than this one? The harmonics of these old Formula 1 cars are also built upon the 2.5th order. Each bank was always running its own exhaust system and they never merged into a single pipe. However, when the motor tops out at nearly 20,000 RPM, the gaps between those harmonics can become quite large. Much larger than we saw in the example of the BMW M5 with the uneven fiving V10. So the sound is not only dependent on the fundamental frequency, but also all of its harmonics and the relationship in between them and their intensity. Now that we know that, welcome! To the format map. I think this might be worth mentioning now. Personally, I think the exhaust system of an uneven 5V10 can be cheated, so it can still build up harmonics based on the fifth order. For the crankshaft to rotate 18 degrees at 6000 RPM should take half a millisecond. In that half of a millisecond, the pressure waves in that hot exhaust pipe should cover a distance of around 10 inches. By lengthening the secondary pipe of the cylinder bank that fires after the 54-degree pause, the arrival of the pressure wave should be delayed just enough that the harmonics can be based on the fifth order. This would obviously work only for 1 RPM, but it might make for a very interesting sound when the relationship between the harmonics changes over the entire RPM range. And while we're on the topic, sometimes in the past car manufacturers sorted out the uneven firing order by fitting a split-pin crankshaft. This weakens the crankshaft a bit, but it enables the engine to fire evenly every 72 degrees. So with the right exhaust, they should be able to build up harmonics based on the fifth order. One of those cars fitted with an even 90-degree V10 was the first generation Lamborghini Gallardo.
This is a 2004 Lamborghini Gallardo, and it's cool.
Listen to this!
Which was used as one of the benchmark cars for the LFA's exhaust sound development. Another benchmark car was the Porsche Carrera GT with its very unique V10 engine. It doesn't really fit in either category. Instead, the Porsche people found 68 degrees to be funny. And that makes it not perfectly even firing, but it's close enough. And if there's one thing that the LFA team learned from the Porsche Carrera GT, sometimes close enough is better than perfect. And so the Porsche Carrera GT became the virtual enemy of the Lexus LFA. You might have noticed the word vowel sounds on this map. You might have also noticed the different colored areas in the background. These represent the frequency ranges of individual vowels. Just like you can move indefinitely on a color palette from one color to another by changing the wavelengths of light that make up the color, you can move indefinitely from one vowel to the next by changing the resonant frequencies that make up the vowel. Watch this.
La, lo, lu, le, li.
The differentiation in vowel sounds is caused by the first two formants, the two lowest resonance frequencies of the vocal tract.
La, lo, lu, le, li.
And there are many more formants, many more resonance frequencies at a higher level, and they also contribute to the overall quality of your voice. But for the differentiation in vowel sounds, the first two formants are the most important. The voice starts out as a pretty colorless buzzing sound. Only after this buzzing sound has resonated through the vocal tract, it gets shaped into the sound we recognize as voice. This is the extremely simplified version. The first formant is controlled by the opening of your mouth. It effectively changes the length of your throat tube. By shortening it, the first resonant frequency will be higher. The same principle applies to the mouth tube, but its length gets mostly controlled by the position of the tongue, and this will mostly affect the second formant. So these formants are creating an envelope similar to an equalizer, which can pull up the loudness of individual frequencies. But why does that even matter? Well, first of all, I think it's really fascinating that something that made so little sense to me when I first read it makes some sense after all, after I've been putting in some effort trying to understand it. And second, the engineering team behind the LFA's exhaust sound wanted to recreate the sound of an F1 car, and Sango was kind enough to display the first two resonant frequencies of an F1 car here on the format map. The chief engineer Tanahashi Haruhiko described it as giving the car a soprano voice, and when a soprano goes through the RPM range, there's something very interesting happening to the vowels.
To illustrate this, we asked classical soprano Kristen Buchatsky to sing scales on 5 different vowels.
La, 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 lo, 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 lo,
and so on. Then I cut the recordings up, and here are the last notes in a different order. Listen carefully and identify the order. When I posted this, I invited any soprano who could differentiate vowels on the high note to send me a recording. Nobody has. At that high pitch, there simply aren't enough harmonics to identify vowels.
So how does that all apply to exhaust systems? For a motor to sing with a soprano voice, it needs the first two formants to match. But if the exhaust fails to provide the first two formants, it will not sing like a soprano, even if the motor would spit out more pressure waves than a Formula 1 engine. Despite having a higher first harmonic than any other car in existence that I know of, instead of a soprano voice, that exhaust note reminds me of a colorless buzzing sound. So unlocking the soprano voice from an engine can be a little bit like unlocking a combination lock with 10 digits. Even if you get 9 numbers right, you won't even know you're close. But we can have a look at how sopranos tune their formants.
The eminent voice researcher Johan Sundberg observed that sopranos usually open their mouths wider for high notes. He argued that they were tuning the first resonance, R1, to the fundamental FO of their voice, what we now call R1 FO tuning.
Does that basically mean to get a soprano voice, apart from a high fundamental frequency, it also takes some sort of throat tube which resonates very close to the same frequency? But how did the LFA engineers do that? Well, I believe right around here. According to the patent, the muffler is designed to enhance the high frequency components. Yeah, but at over 3000 RPM when the valves are open. But when they are open, the two secondary pipes merge just before the final chamber, and the upper two tailpipes are actually designed to enhance the highest frequency components. But the lower tailpipe is really ingenious. It is designed way longer and packed like a muffler to filter out low frequency components. That's why I'm very grateful for Martin Richards that he measured the lengths of the LFA's tailpipes for me. Because I would like to know what length is perfection.
This is the pursuit of the impossible. This is the pursuit of perfection.
But before I show you the length of perfection, there is one more thing. Getting a soprano voice was only half the job. The chief engineer Tanahashi Haruhiko wanted to give the LFA a special voice. The voice of a sobbing soprano.
When I told the engineer that I wanted a sobbing soprano voice, he would ask, "What kind of sound is that?" And I, myself, didn't know.
It sounds like a wild animal that's sad about something. No! I've got my paw stuck! Ow! Ow!
Getting a high revving V10 to scream like a soprano is one thing, but how do you make it sob? It takes a good beating. Beating is an acoustic term that describes the phenomenon that happens when two frequencies are very close to each other and go in and out of phase. Then their peaks and valleys are constantly cycling between constructive and destructive interference, making them louder and quieter. And to achieve this effect in an even firing V10, it needs some unequal length exhaust pipes, but only slightly unequal, not 18 degrees of crankshaft rotation unequal. By looking at the blueprint of the LFA, you will find that one of the exhausts goes above the other, but both have close to the same starting and end point, and that makes it physically impossible that these two pipes are of the same length. But what started out as a packaging problem became actually an acoustic benefit. This actually reintroduced harmonics based on the 2.5th order, but it's a very fine line not to overdo it. As far as I can tell, it really started out as a packaging problem. The engineers could not fit two equal length pipes into the tunnel of the car, but it gave the car a more powerful sound, so the engineers didn't stop there. They also experimented with slightly unequal length headers. Slightly unequal and not random. By varying the pipe lengths of individual cylinders, they could reintroduce harmonics based on the 0.5th order. These slightly unequal length headers added richness to the sound. They also tested another version where they reintroduced harmonics based on the first order. This also gave an impression of more richness to the sound, but it sounded darker than the other example. Unfortunately, I cannot show you any sound comparisons, but this might change soon with the next version of Engine Simulator that's currently in development. And this time around it will be a full-blown fluid dynamics simulation that will be affordable for everyone to recreate the sounds of your favorite pulsating air pumps. Although there are mathematical limitations of how close a simulation can come to reality, but it will remove a lot of guesswork and trial and error of the development process of an exhaust like this. Even the LFA engineers ended up with a lot of real-world testing in the end. Once again, they had to walk a very fine line not to overdo the unequalness, but in combination with the genius muffler design, they were still able to preserve the high pitch. But until the new version of Engine Simulator will be available, we can measure perfection and we can still learn from the best. How short does a throat tube need to be to recreate the sound of a Lexus LFA? And how long does the third one need to be to remove the sounds you don't want to hear from a LFA?
Just measuring these pipes, I think it's this one inside here you want. The lower one to the end. To see in there, but to there, to the tip, is literally 15 centimeters, and it's actually for the top. To that edge there, it's the same.
They are the same length. I did not expect this. Apparently they didn't put it into the final version of the LFA, but that makes me wonder, would it even work? Through the exhaust sound design of the Lexus LFA we gained extensive insights. However, there remain many unknowns and we will continue our research on sound design. Furthermore, the knowledge we have obtained will be utilized to meet the needs of customers who appreciate the added value in exhaust sound. Just to clarify once more, the intake of the LFA was tuned by the musical branch of Yamaha. They were also the ones cutting holes into the carbon fiber chassis. But as far as I can tell after a year of research with the development of the exhaust sound, they had nothing to do with that. The chief engineer specifically mentioned 3 people that were involved: Tamura, Hayashi and Mr. Torimoto, who wrote the engineering article and was mentioned in all the patents. You can read more about the fascinating development story of the LFA in Tanahashi's book. It's quite interesting how supercars pass noise regulations. And thanks for the publisher for letting me use content of the book for the video. But I should also mention I was cherry-picking car sounds all along the video. Just changing the microphone's position in relation to the car's exhaust completely changed the frequency components that showed up in the spectrum. And sometimes these spectrums can be very misleading. Take this one for example. With the lowest frequency of around 750 Hz, it should be reasonably high pitched. But could you guess what it would sound like? So if you guessed it's the sound of a desperate Japanese housewife hiding under the blanket, you're spot on.